Imagine opening your eyes one morning and realizing that something has changed, subtly, quietly, but unmistakably. The streets are still busy, the screens still glow, people still talk. Yet beneath the noise, a haunting silence lingers. It's not the silence of empty rooms, it's the silence of empty minds. You greet your neighbor, expecting a spark of curiosity, a simple question, maybe even a doubt about yesterday's strange headlines. But instead, they nod, repeat the words they've heard on television, and move on without a second thought. At work, your colleagues echo the same phrases, as if reading from an invisible script. And that's when the realization hits you. People aren't thinking anymore. They're reacting, conforming, absorbing. Now imagine this not as a bad dream, but as reality. A world where critical thinking, the skill that built civilizations, challenged empires, and fueled human progress, has quietly faded away. What happens to such a society? What happens to us when the ability to reason, to question, to doubt, is replaced by shallow opinions and endless echo chambers? This is not just speculation. Philosophers, scientists, and educators are warning us about a terrifying new phenomenon, collective stupidity. It's not about people being unintelligent. It's about masses of individuals surrendering their independent judgment, adopting whatever narrative is placed before them, and losing the very spark that makes us human. In this journey, we will confront the unsettling truth behind the decline of critical thinking. We will uncover how systems, technologies, and even our minds are being reshaped, pushed toward conformity rather than curiosity. And by the end, we will face the most urgent question of all. Will we reclaim our ability to think, or will we lose it forever to a system designed to keep us comfortably numb? But before we dive into the heart of this story, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly questioned something, deeply, without rushing, without reacting? If the answer doesn't come easily, you're not alone. Thinking is hard, and in today's world, thinking is discouraged. The environment we live in doesn't reward contemplation, it rewards speed. The faster you respond, the louder your opinion, the stronger your outrage, the more attention you receive. Reflection, nuance, patience, those don't trend. And make no mistake, this isn't accidental. Algorithms feed you only what you already agree with. Schools too often emphasize memorization over exploration. News cycles are designed to provoke quick reactions, not thoughtful analysis. Slowly, almost invisibly, society is conditioning us away from thinking. Away from the very skill that once protected us from manipulation. Decades ago, linguist and philosopher Noam Chomsky warned of this danger. He described how media and political powers manufacture consent training entire populations to consume without questioning, to agree without understanding. Because when people stop thinking for themselves, they become easier to manage, easier to deceive, and far easier to control. Critical thinking, once celebrated as the cornerstone of wisdom, has now become inconvenient. It interrupts the outrage economy. It slows down online debates. It forces uncomfortable questions. Is this true? Who benefits from this belief? What are we not being told? In a world obsessed with being right, asking these questions is seen as dangerous. But how did we arrive here? The roots run deeper than most realize. One of the greatest forces at play is information overload. Neuroscientist Daniel Kahneman discovered that the average person today processes 5 times more information daily than just a few decades ago. Notifications, news alerts, messages, ads, opinions, every moment we are bombarded. Our brains weren't built for this. Overwhelmed, the mind begins to take shortcuts. Instead of analyzing, it follows patterns. Instead of reasoning, it imitates others. Psychologists call this social proof, the tendency to look at what everyone else is doing and assume it must be correct. That's why an online post with thousands of likes feels trustworthy, even if it's false. This isn't stupidity. It's survival, an ancient instinct misfiring in a digital age. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. And it is being used against us. Even more troubling is the decline of deep reading. Neuroscientist Marianne Wolf explains how constant digital skimming rewires our brains. We jump between screens, scan headlines, skip through content, yet we rarely sit with a single idea long enough to understand it. Critical thinking requires attention, but attention has become fractured. When was the last time you read an article from beginning to end without checking your phone? When was the last time you paused after hearing something provocative, not to argue, but simply to reflect? These small habits, once natural, are disappearing. Carl Sagan, One of the great voices of the 20th century once warned, "We live in a society exquisitely dependent on science and technology, in which hardly anyone knows anything about science and technology." His fear was not ignorance alone, but the collapse of the ability to think about the systems we depend on. And that collapse, whether we realize it or not, is happening right now. If Part 1 revealed the cracks in our thinking, Part 2 takes us deeper into the uncomfortable truth about why so many of us avoid critical thought. Because the problem isn't just technological. It isn't only about algorithms, notifications, or overloaded brains. It's also emotional. You see, critical thinking is uncomfortable. It forces us to step outside the warm blanket of certainty. It challenges the ego. It asks us to admit, "I may be wrong." And for many, that is unbearable. When we encounter new evidence that contradicts our beliefs, our brains trigger a response known as cognitive dissonance, a clash between what we thought was true and what reality suggests. Instead of embracing the challenge, most people retreat. They double down on their existing beliefs, defend their tribe, cancel opposing views, and avoid discomfort. The result? We memorize slogans instead of seeking understanding. We repeat mantras instead of engaging in dialogue. And slowly, the ancient art of dialectic honest, open conversation that powered philosophy for centuries fades away. But make no mistake, this retreat has consequences. Because when people stop questioning, they become easy prey for manipulation. Propaganda, fear, and deception thrive in the absence of thought. And this brings us to a haunting question. Who benefits when a population no longer thinks for itself? Stay with me, because the answer runs deeper than most imagine. The education trap. To understand the roots of this decline, we must return to where most of us first learned to think, or rather, where we were trained not to. The education system. John Taylor Gatto, an award-winning teacher turned critic, exposed a startling truth. Modern schools were not designed to produce independent thinkers. They were designed during the industrial age to produce predictable, obedient workers. Schools don't teach anything except how to obey orders, Gatto once said. Think about that. From a young age, children are rewarded not for originality, not for curiosity, but for memorization and compliance. Color inside the lines. Follow instructions. Don't ask too many questions. Over time, the lesson becomes clear. Intelligence is not about thinking. It's about obeying. This pattern doesn't end in childhood. It only intensifies. In workplaces, in the media, and even in friendships, we learn that questioning the consensus can cost us. To speak an unpopular truth risks being labeled difficult or controversial. And so we stay silent. But silence has a price. Over time, silence becomes complicity. The fear of freedom. Psychologist Erich Fromm saw this danger clearly. In his book Escape from Freedom, he explained why many people secretly want to surrender their independence of thought. Freedom, he said, is terrifying because true freedom demands responsibility. To think for yourself means you can no longer blame others for your ignorance. You can no longer hide in the crowd. You must face the uncertainty of truth, and that for many is too heavy a burden. So instead, people choose comfort. They choose distraction. They choose simplicity over complexity. And in doing so, they make themselves easier to control. Enter social media. Now add social media to this mix, and the problem explodes. What was once envisioned as a tool for connection has become a battlefield of outrage and manipulation. Platforms are not built to encourage thought. They are designed to keep you scrolling. Every click, every like, every comment is a data point. And the platforms learn what triggers you, what keeps you reacting, not reflecting. They feed you content that confirms your beliefs, rewards you for instant responses, and nudges you further into emotional extremes. Why? Because your attention is profitable. Your outrage is valuable. Truth doesn't matter. Engagement does. In this environment, the voice of reason is drowned out. Reflection appears weak. Nuance is irrelevant. Why pause to think when reacting is faster, easier, and more rewarded? Decades before Facebook or Twitter, philosopher Marshall McLuhan warned us, the medium is the message. In other words, the way we receive information shapes the way we think. Today's media encourage speed over depth, outrage over nuance, and certainty over humility. Uncertainty, false, shallow, performative certainty, is exactly what makes collective stupidity spread like wildfire. Truth distorted. In this new world, truth itself has been distorted. What is true is no longer decided by evidence, but by virality. A claim repeated enough times, shared enough times, liked enough times becomes truth in the eyes of the crowd. It's not logic at work, it's the tyranny of the majority, not in politics, but in cognition. This raises the stakes. Because if truth is replaced by popularity, then wisdom has no chance, and the consequences are not abstract. They affect elections, pandemics, wars, and the very stability of society. So where do we go from here? We begin by asking better questions. Not safe ones, not convenient ones, but questions that cut through the noise. What am I being told to believe? Who benefits if I believe it? What assumptions lie beneath my certainty? When was the last time I sought out an opposing view, not to attack it, but to understand it? These questions are not easy. They may shake the very ground beneath your feet. But they are necessary, because the antidote to collective stupidity is not raw intelligence, it is courage. The courage to be wrong, the courage to learn, the courage to say, I don't know, and start the journey anyway. As Socrates once said, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. It was not a joke, it was an invitation. An invitation to stay curious, to remain humble, to keep searching. And yet, in our culture, humility is rare. Certainty is worshipped. Arrogance is mistaken for wisdom. Everyone wants to speak, but few want to listen. The irony is that the quiet thinkers, the observers, the listeners, the patient ones, often hold the greatest clarity. But in a society obsessed with speed and spectacle, they are ignored. Still, their way of seeing remains the path forward. Because once you surrender your ability to think, you surrender your freedom. You become a puppet, your strings pulled by forces you cannot see. And those forces are not abstract. They are economic, political, cultural. They are the corporations, profiting from your addiction to outrage. The politicians who rely on your emotional reactions. The institutions that depend on your silence. But when you reclaim your mind, something extraordinary happens. You become harder to deceive. You begin to see through the illusions. You shift from being a passive consumer of ideas to an active seeker of truth. And in that act, however small, you light a fire. A fire that has guided philosophers, scientists, and revolutionaries through centuries. A fire that burns in those who refuse to stop thinking. So the question is, will you carry that fire, or will you let it die in the noise? Up until now, we've explored how society, technology, and education conspire often silently to dull our thinking. But to truly grasp the depth of this crisis, we must look at the battlefield inside the human mind itself. Because the truth is unsettling. Our brains are not built for constant logic. We like to imagine ourselves as rational beings, making decisions with careful thought and evidence. But psychologists and neuroscientists have revealed a sobering reality. We are far more emotional than rational. And that weakness is exactly what makes us vulnerable to manipulation. The two minds. Within Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, in his groundbreaking work Thinking, Fast and Slow, explained that the human brain operates with two systems. System 1 is fast, instinctive, and emotional. It jumps to conclusions, relies on intuition, and conserves energy by avoiding deep analysis. System 2, on the other hand, is slow, deliberate, and careful. It weighs evidence, analyzes arguments, and considers alternatives, but it requires effort, and effort is precisely what today's world discourages. We live in a high-speed, always-on culture. Notifications, headlines, instant opinions, everything screams for our attention, so most of us stay locked in fast mode. Snap judgments, emotional reactions, gut feelings that feel true, even when they're not, and this constant reliance on shortcuts is the fertile soil where collective stupidity grows. How manipulation works. Politicians, marketers, and media outlets all know how to exploit these mental shortcuts. They simplify complex issues into black and white choices. They repeat emotionally charged language until it bypasses reason and lodges in memory. They hammer the same narratives into us until they feel familiar, and familiarity, to the brain, feels like truth. It doesn't matter whether the claim is true. What matters is that it's repeated, echoed, reinforced. And once we accept it, our brains go into defense mode, protecting that belief at all costs. This is known as confirmation bias, our tendency to seek out evidence that supports what we already believe and ignore or dismiss anything that challenges it. Be honest with yourself. When was the last time you truly listened to an opposing view? Not to argue, not to prepare a counterpoint, but to understand? For most of us, the answer is uncomfortable. That's not stupidity, it's human nature. But when unchecked, it becomes a trap. The danger of groupthink. Layer another phenomenon on top. Groupthink. Groupthink occurs when the desire for harmony and conformity in a group overrides the pursuit of truth. People silence their doubts, swallow their discomfort, and go along with the majority, even when the majority is wrong. History is full of catastrophic examples: corporate disasters, failed wars, and even atrocities. Not because people were unintelligent, but because they valued consensus over truth. Social psychologist Irving Janis, who studied groupthink, discovered something chilling. Even highly intelligent, well-educated people can make disastrous decisions when they suppress dissent. Why? Because questioning the group feels unsafe. And going against the grain requires more than intelligence, it requires courage. The price of thinking differently. History also shows us that progress has always come from those who defied the group. Galileo, who insisted that the earth revolved around the sun. Darwin, who challenged religious doctrine with evolution. Nietzsche, who questioned morality itself. Martin Luther King, who stood against centuries of oppression. They were ridiculed, rejected, sometimes imprisoned, some paid with their lives. But they thought anyway. They spoke anyway. And their courage to stand against collective ignorance shaped the world we live in today. But let's not romanticize it. There is always a cost. To think critically in a society that punishes doubt is an act of rebellion. You risk being misunderstood, excluded, or even hated, yet you gain something invaluable. Clarity, self-respect, the quiet strength that comes from knowing your beliefs are truly yours, not programmed into you. The inner void. And so we come to a haunting question. If our world is overflowing with information, why do so many of us still feel lost, anxious, and unfulfilled? The answer lies not in what we have gained, but in what we have lost. One of humanity's greatest habits is fading, the habit of inner dialogue. The ability to sit with a question, to wrestle with it, to allow truth to emerge through reflection. Instead, we outsource our thinking to algorithms, to influencers, to the crowd. But no machine can tell you what is true for you. No trending topic can replace your inner voice. No majority vote can substitute for the clarity of a well-examined belief. And when we lose that inner voice, we lose ourselves. Reclaiming awareness. So what can be done? The first step is awareness. Awareness of our habits. Awareness of the sources we consume. Awareness of when we are truly thinking and when we are merely reacting. One powerful practice is metacognition, thinking about our thinking. Ask yourself, what is influencing my opinion right now? Am I open to being wrong? Am I analyzing this idea or just absorbing it passively? Another is dialectical thinking, the ability to hold two opposing ideas in tension while exploring them. This isn't weakness, it's strength. It allows us to move beyond false binaries, beyond us versus them, and into the realm where true understanding is born. As philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, to understand the immeasurable, the mind must be extraordinarily quiet, still. That stillness, so rare in our noisy age, is where the seeds of wisdom grow. But let's be honest. Critical thinking is not easy. It is not something acquired overnight. It is a discipline, a way of life. It requires more than headlines. It demands books, arguments, and nuance. It requires more than agreement. It demands listening, especially to those you don't agree with. It requires humility, the kind that accepts uncertainty as part of the journey. And above all, it demands the rejection of laziness. Because if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If everyone around you believes something without question, that's your cue to pause. Not to rebel blindly, but to investigate honestly. In an age where ignorance is loud and arrogance is mistaken for competence, thinking deeply is not just a private virtue, it is a public service. By now, we've seen how our brains betray us, how groupthink blinds us, and how silence often becomes complicity. But if we stop here, we miss the most critical truth. The disappearance of critical thinking is not an accident. It is designed. The illusion of safety. Look closer at the systems shaping your daily life: schools, workplaces, media platforms, governments. Do you notice the pattern? Each one rewards compliance, not curiosity; obedience, not independence; predictability, not originality. And beneath all of it lies a hidden message. Thinking for yourself is dangerous. Why? Because true freedom of thought threatens those who profit from control. If you ask the wrong questions, if you resist the ready-made answers, you disrupt the machine. And the machine does not like disruption. This is why speaking out, questioning consensus, or challenging authority often comes at a cost: the cost of being excluded. The cost of being misunderstood. The cost of being labeled difficult, rebellious, or dangerous. And so most people choose safety. They keep their doubts private. They silence their inner voice. They trade truth for comfort. But over time, comfort becomes a cage. Why We Choose Change. Erich Fromm was right when he said many people fear freedom more than they desire it. Because freedom isn't free, it comes with responsibility. To think for yourself means to stand alone at times. It means to face uncertainty without a script. It means admitting, I can no longer blame the crowd for my ignorance, and that terrifies us. So instead we take the easy road. We choose distraction over reflection, simplicity over complexity, noise over silence. And in that choice, we hand over our minds to those eager to control them. The social media trap. Nowhere is this surrender more visible than on social media. These platforms are not neutral, they are engineered environments. Every notification, every algorithmic suggestion, every viral trend is designed to keep you hooked, scrolling, reacting, not thinking. The more you scroll, the more data is harvested. The more you react emotionally, the more valuable you become. Your attention is the product. Your outrage is the currency. And the platforms don't just reflect your beliefs, they shape them. They build echo chambers around you, feeding you more of what you already agree with, until dissenting voices feel alien, even threatening. World narrows, but you believe you are seeing more. And in this digital hall of mirrors, truth becomes almost impossible to find. The medium shapes the mind. Marshall McLuhan's warning rings. Truer than ever, the medium is the message. The way we receive information rewires the way we think. Today's media favors speed over depth, outrage over nuance, certainty over humility. And so we become people who crave fast answers, who mistake confidence for competence, who would rather be loud than be right. Truth itself no longer matters as much as virality. What spreads is what sticks. And the line between information and propaganda blurs until most cannot tell the difference. This is not just a cultural shift, it is a cognitive war. The tyranny of the majority. Think about it. In this world, ideas are judged not by their merit, but by their popularity. If millions share it, it must be true. If it trends, it must matter. If everyone believes it, questioning becomes almost impossible. This is the tyranny of the majority, not in politics but in thought. And it is perhaps the most dangerous tyranny of all because it enslaves not bodies, but minds, breaking the spell. So, how do we resist? It begins with questions, real questions, not the shallow ones designed to confirm what we already think. Questions like, who benefits if I believe this? What assumptions lie hidden beneath this narrative? When was the last time I genuinely sought out a voice I disagree with, not to fight, but to understand? Asking such questions is an act of rebellion in an age of conformity. It is an act of courage in a culture of fear, because the antidote to collective stupidity is not higher IQs, better schools, or even more information. It is courage, the courage to be wrong, the courage to learn, the courage to sit with uncertainty instead of clinging to shallow certainty. The quiet revolution. Socrates said, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Today, that humility has all but vanished. Certainty is worshipped, arrogance is rewarded. Everyone has an opinion. Few have understanding. And yet, in the shadows, quiet thinkers still exist. They don't shout. They don't seek validation. They listen, they reflect. They question. Their voices may be drowned out by the noise, but make no mistake, this is where the revolution begins. Not in mass protests or trending hashtags, but in the quiet courage of individuals who choose to think clearly in a world that doesn't single quotes. Because once you reclaim your ability to think, you reclaim your freedom. You become harder to manipulate. You see through illusions. You are no longer a puppet, you cut the strings. And that is precisely what the powerful fear most. But here's the truth. Reclaiming your mind is not just a personal victory. It is a moral responsibility. Because when you think clearly, you become a light for others trapped in the dark. And in times like these, the world desperately needs more lights. We've traveled far through education, media, psychology, and society. We've uncovered how critical thinking has been eroded, how collective stupidity spreads, and how silence and fear keep us compliant. But now we arrive at the deepest, most unsettling truth. The real reason critical thinking is disappearing is not because people are incapable of it, but because they are afraid of what it might reveal, the fear of truth. Think about it. To question your beliefs means risking your identity. To challenge your tribe means risking belonging. To test your assumptions means risking certainty itself. We live in an era where identity is sacred. People define themselves by their opinions, their political parties, their religions, and their groups. To question an idea is now seen as a personal attack. And so we protect our ideas at all costs, even if it means sacrificing truth. But this is the great illusion. You are not your ideology. You are not your party. You are not your social group. You are a human being capable of learning, growing, evolving. The moment you detach your worth from your current beliefs, the moment you say, I am more than what I currently think, you take the first step toward freedom. Critical thinking as a spiritual act. This is the final truth. Critical thinking is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a spiritual act. It is the decision to value truth over comfort, growth over certainty, freedom over approval. It is the quiet courage to live with your eyes open, even when the light burns. Because once you begin thinking critically, the illusions crumble. You see the manipulation. You notice the systems of control. You recognize the masks people wear. And yes, it can be overwhelming, even painful, but it is real. And reality, no matter how difficult, is the only foundation upon which freedom can stand. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their souls. Yet facing ourselves, our biases, our fears, our inherited beliefs is the very heart of critical thinking. To think critically is not only to question the world, it is to question yourself. To ask, why do I believe what I believe? Where did this idea come from? What part of me is afraid to let it go? And when you ask those questions honestly, something remarkable happens. You step into wisdom. The call for wisdom our society is not starving for opinions, it is starving for wisdom. In a culture addicted to quick answers, wisdom dares to ask deeper questions. In a system built on noise, wisdom embraces silence. In an age of conformity, wisdom chooses freedom. This is your invitation, not just to think, but to wake up. Not just to exist as a product of your environment, but to become the architect of your mind. Because no school, no government, no platform will do this for you. The responsibility is yours alone. And when you rise to it, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see clearly. You begin to feel what it means to live in alignment with truth, not borrowed truth, not popular truth, but your hard-earned truth. You notice manipulation as it happens. You distinguish between information and propaganda, between education and indoctrination, between connection and performance. And most importantly, you begin to lead not with ego, not with noise, but with depth. You become a light in a dark room, a voice of calm in a storm of outrage, a grounded thinker in a world of reactionaries. The quiet revolution. This is what the world needs now, not louder voices, not sharper arguments, but deeper minds. Minds willing to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. Minds that no longer chase validation but pursue understanding. If you want to change the world, start by changing how you think. Not because it's easy, not because it's popular, but because it is right. The rise of collective stupidity is not the disease, it is the symptom. A symptom of fear, of fatigue, of distraction. But every moment you choose to reflect instead of react, to question instead of assume, to seek truth instead of comfort, you push back against that tide. Every act of thinking is an act of rebellion. Every act of reflection is a spark of freedom. Every act of questioning is a step toward a society that values truth again. The final choice. So as this journey ends, remember, the most revolutionary thing you can do right now is not to shout louder, not to conform, not to repeat what others say, but to think. Let the world sleepwalk through slogans and screens. Let them trade their freedom for validation. But not you. You are awake now. And once you awaken, you can never go back. If these words resonated with you, don't keep them to yourself. Share them, not because it's trendy, but because it's necessary. Leave your reflections, your doubts, your questions. Because critical thinking does not grow in silence, it grows in dialogue. And if you're still here, know this, you are not alone. A quiet revolution is already happening. A movement not of noise, but of awareness. Not of outrage, but of reflection. A revolution that begins every time one person dares to ask the harder question. Let that person be you. Stay curious, stay awake, and above all, keep thinking.